It's 8:15 a.m. The office hums with the subtle buzz of fluorescent lights overhead. A steady, mechanical noise that fills the air. A quiet morning, too quiet for most, but not for Melissa Hughes. She stands by the coffee machine, watching the drips fall from the old carafe, each drop like a reminder of time ticking away. The office is half empty at this hour. The hum of idle computers and the distant clack of keyboards are the only sounds that fill the space. She runs her fingers along the cold metal of the coffee machine, feeling the slight vibrations of the morning energy. The smell of burnt coffee hangs thick in the air, bitter, like the tension she carries with her every morning. It has become routine to rise early, prepare herself with the promise of a day where she'll once again be invisible. Her reflection catches her eye in the stainless steel surface, her tired eyes betraying a life lived in the quiet corner of everyone's attention. A woman on the edge of being seen, or not, is not much of a surprise. The office feels like a second home, though it's a home that's never quite hers. Melissa is used to the feeling, watching from the sidelines, never in the game, never part of the conversation. A glance in the reflection tells her everything she needs to know. Tired, unnoticed, waiting for a change that feels like it's always just out of reach. And then Karen walks by. Karen, the woman who wields power with every step, even in the softest of shoes. Karen, with her glossy curls and sharp suits, barely acknowledges Melissa as she strides past, eyes glued to her phone, lips curled in that subtle expression of control. No greeting, no glance, just the faintest brush of her perfume as she passes by, a scent that somehow still feels like a command. Melissa's breath catches for a second, but she doesn't let it show. She's learned long ago to swallow those moments. The sting is old now, too familiar to feel anything more than a small flicker of frustration. The quiet anger she keeps buried deep inside, a well she's long stopped drinking from, only ever rises when she's alone, like now. She turns back to the coffee machine, trying to drown out the disappointment that keeps crawling up her throat. The liquid in the carafe fills her mug, the steam rising up to greet her face with the warmth she needs, but it does nothing for the chill that sits in her chest. Why does this feel different today? There's something there, beneath the coffee steam, beneath the light and the routine, something like an old spark, a whisper of something better, something bigger. She can feel it, creeping up like the soft, cool air of dawn, though it feels out of reach. She's tired of being a footnote, tired of being just the project manager. Just the project manager, they say, as though those words should mean something, as though that title should bring satisfaction. But it doesn't. She's tired of doing all the work, only to be cast aside when it's time for the accolades. Tired of seeing Karen, her boss, the woman who knows how to throw others under the bus without even breaking a sweat, shine in the spotlight while Melissa does the dirty work. The office door opens, and the rush of sound from the hall pours in, pulling her attention away from her thoughts. A few co-workers shuffle past her, talking about weekend plans, their voices filling the space with an energy Melissa can't touch. She's been here so long, and yet it feels like she's never quite made her mark. No one notices her unless something goes wrong. Melissa sighs, long and heavy, as she grabs her mug and walks to her desk. The quiet storm inside her is stirring, just below the surface. She can feel the weight of it, this thing she's been carrying for so long. The thing that pushes her to show up every morning, even when it feels like no one sees her. There's a soft beep from her computer, a message popping up from Karen. "Can you join the meeting at 5? It reads. The kind of message that's both an order and a question, neither of which she's allowed to decline. She rolls her shoulders, loosening the tightness in her neck, feeling the familiar weight of inevitability settle in. Another day, another meeting where she'll be a silent observer, another day where her ideas will be brushed off. But today feels different. It's a strange sensation, like something is shifting in the air. Maybe it's just the bitterness of the morning seeping into her soul, or maybe, just maybe, today is the day that things change. The small flicker of anger she'd been holding on to, the one that had been buried so deep it almost felt forgotten, now feels like it has a voice. It's rising, She sets her mug down and walks toward the meeting room. The usual crowd is already gathering. There's the marketing team whispering among themselves, the finance department who always seem to have their heads buried in spreadsheets, and the executives, always walking a little too tall, looking down from their place of power. She takes a seat near the back, where she's comfortable, where she belongs, or at least where she's been placed. Karen walks in, just as polished and commanding as always, though this time, her presence feels different, more distant. The usual clink of her heels against the floor is somehow absent, as though even she is starting to realize her grip on this place isn't as solid as it once was. The air in the room shifts, but only for a moment. Melissa stays silent through the meeting, as she always does. Her thoughts move like quicksilver behind the mask of composure she's perfected over the years. She listens to Karen's ideas being praised, the ones that never seem to be her own, and she feels the anger bubble again. And then, a moment, an unexpected one. Karen's gaze flits across the room, landing on Melissa, who has been keeping her head down, making herself as invisible as possible. "Melissa," Karen says, her voice light but with an edge, "we'll need your input on the new project proposal. Can you give us an update on your team's progress?" Melissa feels the weight of all eyes on her. The moment stretches out, her heart pounding in her chest. They're looking at her, finally. They've finally noticed. But is it for the right reasons? Is she just a pawn? Or is this her chance? She stands, not with her usual hesitation, but with a quiet, unexpected strength. For the first time in years, her voice doesn't quiver. She speaks, not just to Karen, but to the room. "I'll have a full report by the end of the day." Pause. A ripple of surprise runs through the room. Melissa doesn't know it yet, but this is the beginning. She sits back down, feeling the shift inside her. It's small, it's quiet, but it's there. And for the first time, she realizes that she's tired of being overlooked, tired of waiting. This is her story, and she is ready to take control. If you've ever felt unseen, share your story in the comments below. Let's see how far we've come in finding our voices. Melissa felt the weight of the meeting settle on her shoulders long after it ended. The sterile glow of the office seemed to stretch on forever, its hum now louder in her ears. She sat at her desk, the usual noise of typing and chatter around her a distant blur, her thoughts drifting, heavy like the fog that rolled in from the river each morning. But today was different. The words she had spoken earlier in the meeting, though brief, had carried an energy she wasn't used to. An energy she couldn't shake. She had spoken up. That alone made her feel as though she had done something she had once thought impossible. Still, the thought lingered. What had she really done? Had she stood up for herself? Or had she merely spoken words without meaning behind them? Empty promises dressed as progress? Her computer screen blinked again. Another email from Karen, another reminder of her place in the hierarchy. But this time, Melissa didn't feel the immediate tension. She opened it, reading the words that carried the usual polite control. "Can you have your final report ready by tomorrow? We're presenting to the board and need your input." She didn't mind the tone, she never did. It wasn't the content that bothered her. It was the constant expectation that she would always be available, always compliant, and always the one who could be counted on to get things done. What if she didn't? What if she pushed back? The question lingered in the back of her mind as she typed a quick, almost dismissive response, knowing she would do the work as always. But something shifted in her this time. She thought about it. She thought about the last time she had been asked for a report like this and how much she had given. Hours of extra work, research, and effort only to have Karen claim the credit in the meeting. The realization gnawed at her as she sat in front of her screen. This time, though, she would give the report, but she would give it on her terms. The quiet storm inside her had a name now, and that name was defiance. Not loud, not brash, just a quiet, unwavering resistance. She picked up her phone, scrolling through emails, but she couldn't concentrate. The words on the screen blurred together, and she found herself lost in thought. The usual anxiety she'd feel about the next steps wasn't there, only a subtle sense of control over her own actions. Maybe, she thought, it's time to stop letting them make the decisions for me. At 3:15 p.m., Karen appeared at her desk, her heels clicking sharply against the tile floor. The noise seemed louder than usual today, as though the rhythm of her approach was out of sync with everything around her. "Melissa," Karen greeted her without a smile. "How's the report coming along? We don't have much time before the presentation, and I need it ASAP." Melissa glanced up from her screen. Karen's words, though polite, were unmistakably laced with impatience. This wasn't the first time she had felt the weight of Karen's expectations pressing down on her. But today, Melissa didn't feel that familiar rush of guilt. There was no panic, no urgency, just the quiet, steady hum of certainty in her chest. "I'll have it ready by tomorrow," Melissa replied, her voice calm but firm. The words felt like a declaration, an unspoken challenge in the way she held Karen's gaze. For a moment, Karen didn't respond, her brow furrowing just slightly. It was almost imperceptible, but Melissa noticed it. A flicker of surprise. Karen was used to Melissa being the reliable one, the one who always delivered without protest. But today, there was something else in the air. Melissa didn't break her gaze. She didn't apologize. She didn't offer excuses. She simply stood her ground. Karen's expression shifted, just a fraction, but the flicker of uncertainty was there. "All right then," Karen said with a tight smile. "I'll check in later." As Karen walked away, Melissa couldn't help but feel a strange surge of pride. It wasn't that she had stood up to Karen, at least not in the way one might imagine. It was that, for the first time in years, she had made a decision on her own terms. She didn't wait for permission. She didn't seek validation. She decided. The meeting later that afternoon felt different too. For the first time in a long while, Melissa spoke up during the brainstorming session. Her idea, though simple, was met with the usual skepticism. But instead of shrinking away, instead of letting the dismissive glances and quiet murmurs undermine her, Melissa simply held her ground. She presented her points logically, with confidence that came from somewhere deep within, not from her title or position, but from her sense of self that had been hiding for so long. She was no longer the woman who waited for approval. She was the one making the decisions. And even if no one else noticed, even if Karen's disinterested glances lingered a bit too long, Melissa didn't mind. She was learning how to stop needing their acknowledgement. She was starting to understand that her value didn't come from anyone else's perception of her. It came from within her own ability to act, to create, to make choices that felt right for her. At the end of the day, Melissa stayed late, finishing the report Karen had asked for. The clock ticked slowly, but there was a peace that settled over her as the office emptied out, leaving her alone in the silence. She had written the report on her own terms. It was detailed, meticulous, and ready to be presented. But this time, as she hit send and prepared for tomorrow's meeting, she didn't feel the familiar rush of exhaustion and resentment. She felt something else, something like power, though quiet and unassuming. Melissa left the office that evening not as the project manager, the invisible worker, but as someone who had taken the first step toward defining her own narrative. Melissa's steps to the parking lot were deliberate, each one echoing in the stillness of the empty building. The night was dark, but there was a certain clarity in the air tonight, as though the world itself was holding its breath. She didn't drive home right away. Instead, she sat in her car for a moment, hands gripping the wheel, her thoughts racing. She wasn't sure what had shifted in her today, but it felt important. She had made a choice. She had said no. She had taken the first step toward reclaiming her power. The quiet storm inside her hadn't been loud, hadn't demanded the attention of the room, but it was there, and it was starting to change the way she saw herself. If you've ever felt like you didn't belong, share your story below. We all have a quiet strength that can change the world. The morning after her quiet rebellion felt different. The world outside her apartment window was still, as though the universe was taking a collective breath, waiting to see what Melissa would do next. The soft hum of traffic, the distant sound of birds calling to each other. These noises filled her space, but they didn't fill the hollow feeling inside her. That hollow feeling was always there, buried deep, waiting to be filled. She sat at her kitchen table, sipping her coffee. It was the same old routine, another day in Omaha, Nebraska, another day in the office. But something about today was different. Today, she had made a decision, and it wasn't just the decision to stand up to Karen. It was the realization that this was only the beginning. As she gazed out the window, her thoughts drifted back to a time before all of this, before the weight of her career, before the pressure of always being the one to clean up after others, before the years of invisible labor. Back to a time when she was just a girl, sitting on the porch of her childhood home, listening to the voice of her father, the man who taught her everything she knew about resilience, integrity, and strength. Her father, John Hughes, had always been a quiet man. A factory worker by trade, he had never been one to speak in grand gestures or loud proclamations. But his words, when he spoke them, carried weight that made you listen, even when he wasn't looking for attention. He had taught her to work hard, to never back down, and to always trust her instincts. He had never been rich, never had the luxury of fancy things, but he had something more valuable than all the money in the world. He had character. Melissa remembered the summer evenings when she was a teenager, sitting with her father on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, the sky a canvas of fiery reds and oranges. He would talk to her about the world, about the value of hard work, about standing firm when things got tough. He never sugarcoated life, but he never made it seem impossible either. "I can't promise you the world will be fair, Melissa," he'd say, his voice steady as he sipped his beer, the light from the porch lamp casting shadows on his face. "But I can promise you that if you keep your head up, if you work hard and do right by people, the world will have no choice but to see you eventually." Those were words Melissa held on to, even when she couldn't fully understand them. Back then, it had all seemed so abstract. What did it mean to do right by people? What did it mean to stand firm? Life wasn't as simple as her father made it sound. People weren't always fair. Hard work didn't always pay off. And sometimes, no matter how much you tried, you were still overlooked. But now, as she sat in her small apartment, feeling the quiet strength that had been building inside her over the past few days, she realized something important. Her father hadn't been wrong. In fact, he had been more right than she could have known at the time. The problem wasn't with the world, it was with her. She had spent so many years thinking she had to beg for validation, that she had to wait for someone to see her worth. But her father had taught her a different lesson, one that she was only now beginning to understand. The world didn't need to see her first. She needed to see herself first. She needed to believe in herself first. Melissa stood up from the table, the realization settling in like the warmth of the morning sun. She reached for her phone, opened the Notes app, and began to type. It was time for a change. Time to stop waiting for someone else to hand her the keys. It was time to start writing her own story. The phone rang. It was her father. "Hey, Dad," Melissa said, her voice light, but her mind still swirling with everything she had just realized. "Hey, sweetheart, are you busy?" His voice was calm as always. "Not really," she replied. "Just thinking." "Thinking, huh? You're not sitting around feeling sorry for yourself again, are you?" Melissa smiled. "No, Dad, not this time. Actually, I think I'm starting to understand what you meant all those years ago." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Her father was probably smiling to himself. He always had a way of knowing when she'd finally gotten it. "I figured you would," he said softly. "You were always the smart one, even if you didn't know it." "I didn't know it back then," she said, a small chuckle escaping her lips. "But I think I'm starting now." "Good. You've got more strength than you realize. It's never about how much you can carry. It's about whether or not you can keep standing when the weight gets heavy." Melissa paused. She could hear the quiet wisdom in his words. "You're right," she said, her voice steady. "I've been letting the weight get to me for too long. But not anymore." Her father was silent for a moment, and then he spoke again, his tone softer now. "You don't have to be loud to be strong, Melissa. Just be yourself. Stand tall even when they try to push you down. I've always been proud of you, you know that?" "I know, Dad," she said, her heart swelling with gratitude. "And I'm proud of you, too." The conversation ended, but the warmth lingered. Melissa felt a sense of peace wash over her as she hung up the phone. Her father had given her more than just lessons in hard work. He had given her the belief that she could face whatever challenges came her way, not by fighting back against the world, but by learning to stand in her own truth. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone anymore. It was about proving it to herself. Later that evening, as Melissa prepared for the meeting the next day, she thought about the old lessons from her father. She thought about the importance of quiet strength, of working hard and doing right by people, even when they didn't see you. She thought about how easy it had been to get caught up in the noise of the world, to lose herself in the expectations of others. But now, she could see the truth. Her story wasn't defined by how much others recognized her. It was defined by how she recognized herself. The next day at the office, Melissa walked in with a different energy. She wasn't the same woman who had been silent in the meetings, the one who had sat back and waited for her turn. No, she was someone else now. A woman who had made a choice. A woman who had learned the hard lessons from the past and was ready to apply them in the present. Karen greeted her as usual, but there was a subtle difference in the way Melissa responded. She didn't flinch when Karen called her over to discuss the report. She didn't hesitate when Karen asked for input. Instead, she spoke confidently, her voice steady and calm. Melissa wasn't just showing up for work anymore. She was showing up for herself. If you've ever had someone who believed in you when you didn't believe in yourself, share your thoughts below. Let's talk about the power of lessons passed down through generations. The morning fog had lifted, leaving behind a pale blue sky stretching endlessly above. But inside the office, nothing had changed. The hum of computers, the soft shuffle of papers, the constant low murmur of conversations. It all blended together into a monotony that threatened to suffocate her. Yet, for Melissa, today felt different. She wasn't sure what exactly had shifted. Perhaps it was the lesson from her father, the quiet confidence that had settled into her bones, or maybe it was just the weight of time, the realization that she couldn't keep waiting for permission to be seen. No more standing in the shadows. No more waiting for others to recognize her worth. The email had come early that morning, just like the others. A request for another report, another piece of work that needed her immediate attention. Melissa, the client meeting is in 2 hours. Can you provide an update on your team's progress by then? We need to show them we're ahead of schedule. It wasn't the request itself that bothered her. It was the unspoken expectation that she would drop everything to comply. Melissa had spent years fulfilling these requests without question, working herself to exhaustion to meet deadlines, never once stopping to wonder why she was always the one who had to put in the most effort. But today, there was a shift inside her. A quiet rebellion, a stirring desire to take charge, to redefine what she could give and how she would give it. The truth was, she had spent far too long being seen as just the project manager, the behind-the-scenes worker who made sure things ran smoothly but was never given the spotlight. She sat at her desk, hands hovering over the keyboard, and for a moment, she didn't type. She simply stared at the screen, the cursor blinking back at her, as if it were daring her to take control. And so she did. She opened a new document, typed out a list of the tasks she and her team had completed, and added notes on the progress they had made, real, tangible progress. She didn't sugarcoat it. She didn't embellish. She simply stated the facts. But she also made a decision. She would not rush through this. She would not bend over backward to meet a deadline set by someone else. If the work was to be done, it would be done on her terms. She wasn't going to be overlooked anymore. When Karen walked in an hour later, her usual air of authority was there, as expected. The sharp click of her heels echoed across the floor as she approached Melissa's desk, a flurry of papers in her hands. Without so much as a greeting, Karen dropped the papers onto the desk and gave Melissa a pointed look. "You got the update for the client?" Karen asked, her tone brisk and efficient. Melissa didn't look up immediately. She continued typing for a moment longer, gathering her thoughts, choosing her words carefully. Then, without any hint of hesitation, she straightened up in her chair, turned to face Karen, and handed over the report. "It's all here," she said calmly. "The tasks are on track, and we're ahead of schedule. I've detailed the progress of each phase, and I've outlined the next steps for the team. I'll need to follow up with a few members after the meeting, but we're on schedule. Karen glanced at the document briefly, her eyes scanning it quickly, but the look on her face was one of mild disapproval. She was clearly expecting more, a polished, over-the-top presentation that would impress the clients. But Melissa wasn't going to give her that. She wasn't going to play that game anymore. I asked for a more detailed breakdown, Karen said, a slight edge creeping into her voice. We need to wow the clients, not just show them the basics. I've given them what they need, Melissa replied, her voice steady but firm. The basics are the foundation. Everything else is just fluff. The clients need to see that we're delivering on our promises, not that we can make everything look perfect on paper. There was a long pause. Karen's expression faltered for a moment, and for the first time in a long while, Melissa saw a hint of uncertainty in her eyes. But it was fleeting. Karen quickly regained her composure, giving the report another cursory glance. Well, fine, she said, her tone clipped. But don't expect me to back you up if this doesn't go well with the clients. Melissa didn't flinch. I'm not asking for your backup, she said quietly. I'm asking for the opportunity to do my job. If you let me do that, we'll be fine. Karen opened her mouth to respond, but she closed it again, the words seemingly caught in her throat. She looked at Melissa for a long moment, her lips pressed into a thin line, before she gave a sharp nod. Fine, she said finally, her voice cold. I'll take it to the clients. But don't make a habit of this, Melissa. As Karen walked away, Melissa felt a surge of relief wash over her. She had done it. She had stood her ground. For the first time in years, she hadn't backed down. The quiet strength that had been growing inside her was beginning to take root. But the feeling was bittersweet. She knew that this moment, this small act of defiance, was just the beginning. There would be more battles ahead. More times when she would have to stand up for herself. More times when Karen would try to push her down. But now, Melissa knew she had the power to push back. Later that day, the client meeting arrived. Melissa wasn't surprised when Karen began the presentation with the usual flourish, speaking in broad terms about the project and its potential. She spoke as though the progress was hers alone, as though she had single-handedly driven the team's success. But Melissa didn't feel resentment. Instead, she felt something else, something like peace. She wasn't going to fight Karen's battles anymore. She wasn't going to be her puppet. When it was her turn to speak, Melissa stood up, calm and composed. She didn't try to steal the spotlight. She didn't try to make her presentation flashy. Instead, she simply outlined the facts, presenting the progress they had made and what they still needed to do. She spoke with confidence, knowing that the work spoke for itself. The clients listened intently, nodding in agreement as she spoke. They asked questions, and Melissa answered them clearly and concisely, without hesitation. There was no pomp, no bravado, just a quiet, unwavering focus on the task at hand. When the meeting ended, the clients were satisfied. They shook Melissa's hand, congratulated her team, and expressed their confidence in the project's success. As the room cleared out, Karen gave Melissa a curt nod, though it lacked the usual disdain. "Good job," she muttered, her voice tight. Melissa didn't respond right away. She simply walked out of the room, her head held high. For the first time, she didn't feel the need to say anything in return. The acknowledgement was enough. She had taken the first step toward proving herself, not to Karen, not to anyone else, but to herself. She had stopped waiting for validation. She had stopped asking for permission. And in doing so, she had uncovered something more valuable than any praise could offer. Her potential was no longer hidden. It was right there in front of her, plain for all to see. If you've ever felt the need to prove your worth to someone who never saw you, share your story below. Let's celebrate quiet strength and real progress. The tension between Melissa and Karen had been simmering for weeks now. It was unspoken, a subtle undercurrent running through their interactions. Karen, who had always seen herself as the force that kept everything together, seemed thrown off balance by Melissa's newfound confidence. She had been used to controlling the narrative, to wielding her power like a sharp tool, cutting through obstacles without a second thought. But Melissa was different now. She no longer waited for Karen's approval. She no longer bent to her will, and Karen didn't quite know how to handle it. For the past few days, Melissa had been working on a new proposal, one that was critical for the company's next big project. The team had been struggling to find a way forward, but Melissa had come up with a plan, a strategy that was simple but effective. She knew it would work, but she also knew that presenting it wouldn't be easy. Karen would undoubtedly try to take credit, downplay the idea, or tear it apart in front of the higher-ups. But this time, Melissa was ready. The email came early that morning, just like all the others. "Melissa, I need you to present your proposal to the board today. Make sure it's polished. I'm counting on you." Melissa read the message twice, trying to steady her breathing. She had expected it, but she didn't feel the usual surge of anxiety this time. Instead, she felt something else, a quiet, determined sense of calm. She had worked hard on this proposal. She knew it was solid. She wasn't going to let Karen steal the credit this time. She wasn't going to be the quiet contributor in the back. Today, she would step into the spotlight. She walked into the conference room a little earlier than everyone else, setting up her presentation materials. The room was already buzzing with anticipation. The board members were filtering in, exchanging pleasantries, getting settled. But Melissa didn't pay attention to them. She focused on her work. She focused on the task at hand. As she set up her laptop, she couldn't help but remember all those years of being overlooked, years of doing the hard work, making sure everything was in place, and never once being recognized for it. She had given so much of herself, only to watch others take the credit. But today, that would change. Today, she would show them who she really was. Karen walked in with her usual air of authority, followed by the executives. She flashed a quick, professional smile at Melissa, but there was an edge to her expression, a subtle, unspoken tension that Melissa recognized immediately. Karen didn't like being challenged, and she especially didn't like being challenged by someone she had always considered beneath her. "Melissa," Karen said, her tone brisk, "ready to present your proposal?" Melissa looked up, meeting her gaze. There was no hesitation in her eyes. "Yes," she said simply. "It's ready." Karen glanced at the board members, her eyes flicking back to Melissa. She could see the quiet confidence radiating from her, and it irritated her more than she cared to admit. But she didn't show it. Not yet. She nodded curtly. "Good. Let's get started." Melissa stood at the front of the room, presenting her proposal with clarity and precision. She didn't try to over-explain or oversell it. She simply laid out the facts. She talked about the strategy, the timeline, and the expected results. She answered every question with confidence, and for once, she didn't second-guess herself. She didn't wait for Karen to swoop in and take control. As the presentation went on, she could see the board members paying attention. They were listening, they were engaged, and they were impressed. But Karen didn't like it. Melissa could see the subtle shifts in Karen's expression. The way her lips tightened, the way her eyes narrowed as she tried to find fault with the proposal. She wasn't used to being sidelined, and it was starting to show. But Melissa didn't back down. She continued to speak, to present, to stand firm in the knowledge that her work was solid. Finally, as the meeting drew to a close, one of the board members, a senior executive named Tom, spoke up. "This proposal is exactly what we need," he said, nodding in approval. "I'm confident this will take us in the right direction." "Melissa, excellent work." The words hit Melissa like a wave. For so long, she had dreamed of hearing them, dreamed of the moment when someone would finally see her for who she truly was, for the value she brought to the table. But she wasn't done yet. The most important moment was still to come. Karen, who had been silent throughout the meeting, stood up slowly. She gave the board members a tight smile, but her eyes never left Melissa. "Well," she said, her voice strained but composed. "It's clear that Melissa has put a lot of work into this proposal. We'll be moving forward with it." For a moment, it felt like time stopped. Karen's words were hollow, and they carried none of the authority that had once made Melissa feel small. She had expected Karen to undermine her in front of everyone, to twist her work into something that was hers. But instead, Melissa had shown up. She had stood her ground, and the board had noticed. As the meeting concluded, the board members began to gather their things, making their way out of the room. Melissa stayed behind for a moment, her heart still pounding in her chest. She had done it. She had finally made her mark. She had taken the first real step toward reclaiming her place in the company. Karen lingered at the door, watching Melissa for a moment before speaking. "You did well," she said, her tone tight, almost begrudging. "But don't get too comfortable." Melissa looked up, meeting Karen's eyes. For a brief moment, there was no fear, no hesitation. She was no longer the quiet, overlooked worker. She was no longer the one who waited for validation. "I'm not getting comfortable, Karen," Melissa said softly, "but I'm done waiting for you to notice me." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Karen opened her mouth as if to say something, but no words came. She simply turned and walked out of the room, her heels clicking sharply on the floor. Melissa stood there for a moment, the silence of the empty room wrapping around her like a blanket. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel the weight of her work. She didn't feel the pressure of being unseen. Instead, she felt a quiet sense of accomplishment, a deep knowing that she had stepped into her own power. She wasn't just the project manager anymore. She wasn't just the one who cleaned up everyone else's mess. She was someone to be reckoned with, and from now on, she would make sure everyone knew it. As she walked out of the conference room, a quiet smile played at the corners of her lips. She had done it. She had found her voice, and she was no longer afraid to use it. If you've ever had a moment where you realized your worth, share it below. Let's celebrate the quiet victories that lead to bigger changes. The day after the board meeting, the energy in the office had changed. There was a buzz in the air, an undercurrent of excitement that had been absent for far too long. Melissa's proposal had been a success, and even Karen couldn't deny that the board had been impressed. But Melissa knew better than to get too comfortable. She had seen this before, how quickly the winds could shift, how fast the tides could turn. And sure enough, a storm was coming. Came in the form of an email, simple and to the point. "Melissa, we need to talk. Please come to my office as soon as possible. Karen." The email felt like a slap in the face. It was cold, impersonal, and it carried a weight that Melissa could already feel settling in her chest. She had no idea what this was about, but her gut told her it wasn't good. She'd been on edge all morning, anticipating some kind of fallout, but she couldn't have predicted this. As she walked down the narrow hallway toward Karen's office, her heart beat faster with each step. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to lose everything she had worked so hard to build. When she knocked on the door and entered, Karen was sitting behind her desk, her back straight and her expression unreadable. "Sit down, Melissa," Karen said, her voice flat. Melissa sat, the familiar tension in the air almost suffocating. The same tension she'd felt in the countless meetings where she had kept her head down, her thoughts silent, her voice non-existent. But today, that silence was different. Today, Melissa wasn't the meek employee. Today, she was the one in control of her future. Or so she thought. Karen didn't speak right away. Instead, she clicked through a series of documents on her computer, her eyes not meeting Melissa's. It felt deliberate, like Karen was waiting for the right moment to drop the bomb. Finally, Karen looked up, her gaze sharp. "I've received some complaints," she said, her tone colder than before, "about your recent behavior, specifically how you handled the proposal meeting." Melissa's stomach sank. She had expected something like this, but hearing it from Karen's mouth made it all the more real. "Complaints," Melissa repeated, her voice steady despite the rush of anxiety that threatened to overwhelm her. "From who?" "From several members of the senior management team," Karen replied, not skipping a beat. "They're concerned about your lack of respect for authority. Your attitude during the presentation was unprofessional. Some of them feel that you overstepped your boundaries." Melissa's mind raced as she tried to process the words. She had spoken up, yes, But she had only presented the facts. She hadn't overstepped anything. She had simply done her job. "I was simply doing my job, Karen," Melissa said, trying to keep her voice even. "I presented the proposal. I answered their questions. I didn't act unprofessionally. Melissa," Karen interrupted, her voice sharper than before. "You need to understand something. You're still new to this. You may have been here longer than some, but that doesn't mean you've earned the right to push boundaries. The company's culture is built on respect for hierarchy. You may have had good intentions, but your actions are causing problems." Melissa was stunned. This wasn't the same Karen she had known. This wasn't the same woman who had once been so dismissive of her work, who had never once acknowledged her potential. This was someone else entirely, a person who saw her as a threat, someone who was trying to take control. "Are you firing me?" Melissa asked, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Karen's lips twisted into something like a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "No, I'm not firing you, but I am placing you on probation. Effective immediately." Melissa felt the floor shift beneath her. Probation? It felt like a slap in the face, a punishment for doing exactly what she had been asked to do. She had been asked to present her work, to prove herself. And now, for the very thing she had been praised for, she was being reprimanded. "I don't understand," Melissa said, her voice faltering despite her best efforts to remain composed. "I thought the meeting went well. I thought the proposal was solid." You may have thought it went well," Karen said, cutting her off. "But you need to understand that the people who matter don't see it that way. You're not just here to present your ideas. You're here to follow directions, to support the people at the top. That's what you need to learn, Melissa." The words hit her like a cold wave, knocking the wind out of her. She had worked so hard for this. She had put everything into her job, into proving herself. And now it seemed like everything was slipping away. "I've been doing everything you've asked," Melissa said quietly, her throat tight. "I've been working overtime, I've been staying late, I've been putting in the effort. Why is it never enough?" Karen didn't answer right away. She simply looked at Melissa with a cold, almost calculating expression. "You've been doing what's expected of you, but now it's time for you to learn the real game. If you want to move up in this company, you'll have to play by the rules. You'll have to step back and let the right people take the lead." Melissa felt the weight of Karen's words, and for the first time, the quiet storm inside her began to feel like a distant memory. What had she been fighting for? What had she been standing up for if it meant losing everything she had worked so hard to build? For the next few days, Melissa went through the motions. She attended meetings, met with clients, and continued to work on the projects that had been assigned to her. But nothing felt the same. The probationary period had shattered something inside her. Something that had felt so solid, so unshakable just days ago. She couldn't shake the feeling of having lost something, her sense of security, her sense of self. The walls she had built around her, the quiet strength that had once made her feel invincible, now felt fragile. The team was still cordial, but there was a distance. The smiles were polite, but the warmth had gone. People whispered behind her back, and Melissa could feel it. She wasn't just under scrutiny, she was under siege. One afternoon, as she was going over a report in her office, she heard the soft knock on her door. It was Emily, her daughter. Melissa hadn't seen her much lately, between the late nights and the never-ending deadlines. But today, Emily came to visit. "Hey, Mom," Emily said, her voice soft but filled with concern. "How's it going?" Melissa forced a smile. "It's fine. Just, a lot of work." Emily sat down across from her, her brow furrowed. "You don't seem fine. What's going on? You haven't been yourself lately." Melissa sighed, leaning back in her chair. "I don't know, Em. I thought I was making progress, but everything just feels off. Like I've lost everything I was working for." Emily was quiet for a moment, her eyes softening. "You've always told me that if something was worth fighting for, it was worth losing something for. Maybe this is just part of the process." Melissa looked at her daughter, the weight of her words sinking in. Emily was right. The world wasn't going to hand her everything she wanted. She would have to fight for it. And if that meant losing a few battles along the way, then so be it. Melissa wasn't going to give up. She couldn't. Have you ever felt like you were on the brink of losing everything? Share your story below. Let's talk about how we pick ourselves up when the world tries to knock us down. The silence that had settled over the office was oppressive, almost suffocating. The weeks that followed her probationary meeting with Karen had dragged by, each day blurring into the next. Every interaction with her colleagues felt strained. The respect she had once commanded, whether silently, through her work, or through the faint traces of admiration that had once existed, had evaporated. She was no longer the team's trusted leader, the one who always delivered. Now, she was just another employee on probation, someone to be watched, scrutinized. But Melissa knew something deep inside her. Something that refused to be snuffed out by the cold, professional distance of Karen's condemnation. She had come too far to let this moment define her. This was only a setback, a temporary pause. The real work, her personal journey, was still unfolding, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. She had a choice. She could let this defeat consume her, or she could rise above it, quietly but steadily, and show the world, and herself, that this moment wouldn't break her. She chose the latter. In the first days following the meeting, Melissa had been tempted to retreat. The self-doubt she'd spent years harboring resurfaced with force. She spent sleepless nights tossing and turning, her mind racing through all the what-ifs and maybes. What if Karen was right? What if Melissa really was too outspoken, too bold, too much of a threat to the company's delicate hierarchy? But every morning, when she woke up and made her way to the office, she reminded herself of something her father had once told her. "You're the one who decides what kind of person you'll be." The memory of his words gave her the courage to keep going, even when everything inside her wanted to retreat and lick her wounds. Her first act of defiance was subtle. She didn't make grand gestures. She didn't seek anyone's validation. She simply showed up every day, on time, prepared, and with a quiet sense of resolve that had begun to take root in her soul. She stopped seeking Karen's approval. She stopped worrying about what others thought. She realized that her worth wasn't tied to Karen's judgment or the fleeting validation of her colleagues. Her worth was something that came from within. It wasn't long before Melissa started to get noticed again. But this time, it wasn't because she was trying to impress anyone. It wasn't because she was speaking up in meetings or pushing boundaries. It was because she had become unshakable in her commitment to herself. She was quiet, steady, and strong, no longer afraid of stepping into her power. The first sign of change came when one of her teammates, a junior analyst named Tim, approached her during a lunch break. Tim had always been a little unsure of himself, often looking to others for validation, but today, something about him was different. "Hey, Melissa," Tim said, standing at her desk, looking nervous. "I just wanted to say, I've been noticing how you've been handling things lately. You've been really calm, even when everything feels like it's falling apart. I respect that." Melissa was taken aback. She had never expected someone like Tim, someone so young, so eager to please, would notice anything about her. But there it was. He was seeing her, not for the work she had done in the past or for the mistakes she had made, but for who she was in the moment. Calm, resilient, present. "Thanks, Tim," she said, her voice quiet but sincere. "It's been a rough couple of weeks, but I'm just focusing on doing what I can. It's all you can do, really." Tim nodded, his expression softening. "I just wanted to say that you're leading by example. You might not think so, but people are noticing. You're setting a standard." That simple acknowledgement hit Melissa harder than she expected. For weeks, she had been walking around with a weight on her shoulders, feeling invisible, unseen. But now someone had seen her, not just for what she was capable of doing, but for who she was. That small conversation, that brief moment of connection, sparked something inside her. She realized that leadership wasn't about titles or grand gestures. It was about quietly doing the work and showing up for others, whether or not anyone noticed. The next step came with the work itself. Despite the tension and distance from her colleagues, Melissa had been quietly improving her relationships with her team. She wasn't demanding attention. Instead, she was working alongside them, offering guidance when needed, and always putting in the effort. She took the time to listen to their concerns, to help them solve problems, and to build up their confidence in themselves. Slowly but surely, her team began to come together, to operate more cohesively than they had in months. And even Karen couldn't deny the results. One morning, Karen called Melissa into her office. The same cold formality that had characterized their previous meetings now tempered with something else. For the first time in a long while, there was no hidden disdain, no subtle undercurrent of criticism. "Melissa," Karen said, her voice unexpectedly neutral, "I've been hearing good things about your work lately. The team is functioning better. I'm seeing progress." Melissa stayed silent for a moment, absorbing the unexpected compliment. It was a step in the right direction, but she didn't feel the need to bask in it. She had earned her place by simply doing the work. No fanfare, no applause. "Thank you," Melissa replied calmly. "I'm just doing my job." Karen gave her a small nod, her face betraying a slight hint of recognition. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The respect was there, even if it was only in its infancy. Later that afternoon, Melissa walked back to her desk, a quiet sense of pride swelling inside her. The road had been long, filled with setbacks, failures, and challenges. But in the midst of it all, she had remained true to herself. She had faced the storm, not with grand gestures or loud rebellions, but with quiet strength. As the weeks passed, things began to settle into a new rhythm. The office was still tense, but Melissa was no longer just surviving. She was thriving. She was no longer waiting for anyone's permission to succeed. Her team began to trust her more, and her confidence grew. She stopped second-guessing her decisions and started taking risks, calculated risks of course, but risks nonetheless. The next major project that came across her desk was one that could make or break her career. It was a high-stakes initiative with tight deadlines, and Karen made it clear that it was critical to the company's future success. Melissa's first instinct was to hesitate, to doubt herself. After all, this project had the potential to be the tipping point, the one that would either confirm her place in the company or mark her failure. But this time, she didn't hesitate. She embraced the challenge. She called in her team, laid out the plan, and let them know that she trusted them. This time, she was ready. The project was a success, not just because it met all the requirements, but because it brought her team together. They worked in sync, each member contributing their strengths, learning from each other, and lifting each other up. And when the project was complete, when the numbers were finalized, and the reports were sent to the board, Melissa received the praise she had earned, not because of her title or her position, but because of her quiet leadership. For the first time in years, Melissa didn't feel the need to seek out validation. She didn't need anyone to tell her she had done a good job. She knew she had, and that was enough. Her quiet triumph wasn't about recognition or accolades. It was about the journey she had taken, the growth she had experienced, and the strength she had found within herself. It was about realizing that, no matter how many times the world tried to knock her down, she would rise again. And this time, she would rise on her own terms. Have you ever experienced a quiet triumph? A moment where you realized you had accomplished something without needing to be recognized for it? Share your story below. Let's celebrate those small, quiet victories that matter most. Melissa had always been the kind of person who kept her head down, worked hard, and stayed out of the spotlight. But now, things are different. She had learned that she wasn't just meant to exist in the background, waiting for others to notice her. She wasn't just a cog in the machine, a name in the payroll department. She was someone capable of leading, of inspiring, of taking charge when needed. Yet even with all her progress, Melissa knew that she was still fighting an uphill battle. Karen's influence over the company was undeniable. The board still looked to her for answers, and Karen had made it clear time and time again that she was the one who called the shots. Despite everything Melissa had accomplished, she knew that she had yet to fully break free from Karen's shadow. And so, when the next major project came through, a high-profile client, the kind that could make or break the company's reputation, Melissa knew this was her moment. This was the project that would prove to everyone, and to herself, that she was more than just someone who could get by. She was someone who could lead, who could take the company to new heights. But she didn't anticipate how hard Karen would push back. It started with the usual routine. Meetings, conference calls, emails flying back and forth. The pressure was mounting, but Melissa had everything under control. Her team was on track. They were ahead of schedule. Everything was falling into place. Then, one afternoon, Karen called her into her office. "Melissa, I've been reviewing the client proposal," Karen began, her voice crisp and clinical. "And I don't think it's quite ready. We need to make some changes, strategic shifts. I'll need you to redo the presentation." Melissa blinked, taken aback by the request. "What kind of changes?" she asked, trying to steady her voice, trying to keep her focus. Karen's gaze didn't waver. "We're going to go in a different direction. We need to emphasize the financial aspects more, maybe tone down the innovative ideas you've suggested. The clients don't need to be dazzled. They need reassurance." Melissa's heart sank. This was a pivot she hadn't prepared for. She had worked tirelessly on the proposal, putting together a strategy that was both bold and innovative. She had pushed her team to think outside the box, to take risks, to show the clients something they hadn't seen before. This new direction felt like a step backward. "But Karen," Melissa started, her voice faltering slightly, "I believe this strategy is what will set us apart from the competition. It's exactly what the client has been asking for. We can't just give them the same thing they've seen 100 times before." Karen's lips tightened, her eyes narrowing. "Melissa, you're not the one in charge of the client's needs. I'm telling you what needs to be done. If you want this proposal to work, you'll follow my lead." The words hit Melissa like a punch to the gut. She had always deferred to Karen. She had always been the one to support Karen's vision, to follow her lead. But now something inside her snapped. The quiet strength she had been cultivating. The same strength that had gotten her through the past months of tension and uncertainty rose up within her, pushing back against Karen's dominance. "I've been doing what you've asked, Karen," Melissa said, her voice firm, no longer uncertain. "I've been following your lead, supporting your vision. But this time I can't. This is my proposal, my team. We've worked hard on this, and I believe in it." Karen's face turned a shade darker. "I don't care what you believe, Melissa. I'm in charge here, and you will do what I say. Do you understand?" For a moment, silence hung in the air between them. The tension was palpable. Melissa could feel the weight of Karen's words pressing down on her. But she could also feel the weight of her own resolve pushing back. She had spent so long trying to prove herself, trying to earn a seat at the table, and now that she had it, she wasn't about to give it up without a fight. "I understand," Melissa said slowly, her voice steady, "but I'm not going to just roll over and accept this. I've earned my place here, Karen, and I won't let you take away the work my team and I have done." Karen stared at her, her eyes flashing with anger. "This is insubordination, Melissa. You're crossing a line." Melissa stood her ground. She wasn't going to back down this time. "Maybe it's time to cross that line." "I'm not afraid of you, Karen." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The room felt heavy, the air thick with unspoken words. Then Karen finally broke the silence, her voice low but dangerous. "You're making a mistake, Melissa. I've given you everything. I've given you opportunities. I've given you the chance to prove yourself. And this is how you repay me." Melissa shook her head, her heart pounding in her chest. "I'm not repaying you, Karen. I'm standing up for myself. I'm standing up for my team. And I'm standing up for what's right." Karen's gaze hardened, and for the first time, Melissa saw something akin to fear flicker in her eyes. Fear of losing control. Fear of being exposed. Karen was used to being the one in charge, the one with the power, and she didn't know how to handle it when someone stood up to her. "You'll regret this," Karen said, her voice cold and final. Melissa didn't respond. She simply turned and walked out of the office, her head held high. She knew there would be consequences. She knew that standing up to Karen would not be easy. But for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of freedom. She had done what she needed to do. She had drawn a line in the sand. and no matter what happened next, she would never go back. The days that followed were filled with tension. Karen made it clear that she was not pleased with Melissa's actions. She sidelined her in meetings, undermined her in front of clients, and made passive-aggressive comments about her leadership. But Melissa didn't back down. She kept pushing forward, focused on the work, focused on her team. She had come too far to let Karen's manipulation control her any longer. Then, just as she had anticipated, the call came. The board had scheduled a meeting to discuss the ongoing project, and Melissa was invited to attend. Karen had made it clear that she wanted Melissa there, but the tone of the invitation was cold, dismissive, as though she were doing Melissa a favor. As Melissa sat in the conference room, waiting for the meeting to begin, she felt the weight of the moment settle in. This was it, the tipping point. She had stood up to Karen. She had fought for her vision, her work, her team. Now, it was time to see if she would be rewarded for her courage or crushed by the weight of Karen's power. The meeting began, and for the first time in a long while, Melissa felt a sense of peace. She knew she had done the right thing. She knew that no matter what happened next, she was no longer afraid. When it was her turn to speak, she stood up, her voice steady and confident. She presented her proposal not just as a strategy, but as a statement of who she was, of what she stood for. She didn't back down. She didn't shrink. She simply presented the facts and let the work speak for itself. When the meeting ended, the board members were impressed. They saw the potential in her proposal, the strength of her vision. And when Karen spoke, it was with forced politeness, her words hollow and rehearsed. The power had shifted just slightly. And in that small shift, Melissa found something she hadn't realized she'd been searching for. Her own voice. Have you ever reached a tipping point in your life where everything changed in an instant? Share your story below. Let's talk about the power of standing up and finding your voice. The aftermath of her confrontation with Karen left a strange sort of calm in its wake. It wasn't the calm of victory. Melissa wasn't sure she had won. But it was a kind of peace, an acceptance that she had done the right thing, even if she didn't know exactly what would come next. The days after the meeting were filled with an unsettling silence. Karen kept her distance, focusing on other projects. Her usual control over Melissa's every move now tempered by an unspoken tension that neither could acknowledge directly. The office itself had become a battleground of sorts, but Melissa was done fighting the way Karen wanted her to. She had been playing by the rules of the office, but now, she was done letting Karen or anyone else dictate her worth. This was no longer about Karen. This was about Melissa taking control of her own narrative, rebuilding herself from the ground up, starting with her team. Melissa threw herself into her work, but this time, it was different. She wasn't just checking off tasks or making sure deadlines were met. She wasn't just playing her part in the corporate machinery. Now, she focused on leadership in its truest sense. She stopped worrying about impressing Karen, stopped caring about whether her proposal would make it through unscathed. Instead, Melissa worked on creating a space where her team could thrive, where they could share ideas freely, trust one another, and take ownership of the work. She began holding regular one-on-one meetings with her team members, allowing them to share their concerns, ask for feedback, and talk openly about their own aspirations. She listened not just to respond, but to understand. Melissa had always been the quiet, steady force in the background, but now she wanted to be the one who built others up, who encouraged them to see their own potential, just as she had begun to see hers. It wasn't easy. Some of her colleagues still treated her with a subtle skepticism, as though they weren't quite sure where she fit in this new dynamic. They had seen her as a quiet worker, someone who followed orders without question. Now, they were learning to see her as a leader. It would take time, but Melissa was determined to prove to them, and to herself, that she could do this. It was the small victories that made the difference. The way her team began to take more initiative, the way they started presenting their ideas with more confidence. It wasn't immediate, but over time, the shifts were undeniable. Melissa wasn't the only one growing. Her team was growing with her. She also began to take more risks in her work, pushing boundaries she had once feared. She proposed new ideas, new processes, and new ways of thinking. Sometimes they were accepted. Sometimes they were shot down. But what mattered most was that she was no longer afraid of rejection. She had learned that failure wasn't a reflection of her worth. It was simply a part of the process. The more she failed, the more she learned, and the stronger she became. Despite the progress she was making, Melissa still had to confront the elephant in the room. Karen. The tension between them remained thick, a silent, unspoken war that neither of them acknowledged directly. Karen's power still loomed large, her influence over the office undeniable. But Melissa had learned something crucial. She didn't need Karen's approval. She didn't need anyone's approval. Her worth didn't depend on the validation of the person who had once held power over her. Melissa realized that to move forward, she had to stop waiting for permission from Karen or anyone else. She had to take charge of her own career, her own destiny. She stopped seeing Karen as an obstacle and started viewing her as a challenge. If Karen wanted to undermine her, fine. If Karen wanted to take credit for the work, let her. Melissa would keep doing the work. She would keep proving herself not to Karen but to herself. One afternoon, just as the dust was beginning to settle from the tension of the previous weeks, Melissa received an unexpected email. It was from the board of directors. Melissa, we've been reviewing the progress of the latest project, and we've been impressed with your leadership and the results your team has delivered. We'd like to meet with you next week to discuss your role moving forward. Please confirm your availability for Monday at 10 a.m. Melissa read the email twice, her heart racing. It was a moment of reckoning. This was what she had worked for. A chance to prove that she had earned her place at the table. She wasn't going to let this opportunity slip away. She didn't need to wait for Karen's approval. She was ready to take charge, to step into the role she had always known she could fill. The meeting came quickly. Melissa arrived at the boardroom early, her hands steady as she prepared her materials. This wasn't about her proposal anymore. This was about showing the board that she was capable of leading at the highest level. She wasn't just the project manager anymore. She was someone who could influence the direction of the company. When the board members filed into the room, there was no fanfare, no grand speeches. It was just the usual corporate meeting, but this time, Melissa felt a sense of purpose. She had earned this moment. She was no longer the person who waited to be noticed. She was the one doing the noticing. The meeting went smoothly. Melissa answered questions with clarity and confidence. She outlined the progress her team had made, the challenges they had overcome, and the opportunities that lay ahead. She didn't oversell anything. She simply presented the facts and let her work speak for itself. At the end of the meeting, the chairperson looked at Melissa and smiled. "You've done great work, Melissa. We've been impressed with the way you've turned things around. We'd like to offer you a promotion to senior project manager. You've earned it." Melissa's heart skipped a beat. She had expected this moment to feel different, more celebratory, more triumphant, but it didn't. Instead, it felt like the culmination of everything she had been working for. It wasn't about the title. It wasn't about the recognition. It was about the fact that she had fought for this. She had earned it, and no one could take that away from her. "I'm grateful for the opportunity," Melissa said, her voice steady. "I'll continue to give my best to this company and my team." The chairperson nodded. "We look forward to seeing where you take us, Melissa. Keep up the good work." As she left the boardroom, Melissa couldn't help but smile. It wasn't a loud, celebratory moment. It wasn't a victory lap, but it was a quiet triumph. A recognition of the journey she had been on, the growth she had experienced, and the strength she had found within herself. Later that day, as Melissa sat at her desk, she reflected on how far she had come. She had faced so many obstacles, so many moments of doubt and fear, but through it all, she had remained steady, grounded, and determined. She had rebuilt herself from the ground up, not through grand gestures or flashy accomplishments, but through quiet resilience, hard work, and an unwavering belief in her own worth. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more challenges, more setbacks. But for the first time in a long time, Melissa knew she could handle whatever came her way. She had built a foundation of strength, and nothing could shake it. Have you ever had to rebuild yourself from the ground up? Share your story below. Let's talk about the power of resilience and the quiet strength that helps us rise. Melissa sat at her desk late one evening, the office around her now silent, save for the faint hum of the fluorescent lights above. The glow of her computer screen was the only source of light, casting a soft, warm hue over her workspace. It had been a long day, full of meetings, emails, and endless tasks. But for the first time in what felt like forever, Melissa didn't feel drained. She didn't feel the weight of expectations crushing her. Instead, she felt a quiet satisfaction, a sense of peace that had been missing for so long. She had just wrapped up a meeting with her team, discussing the next phase of the project they had been working on for weeks. The team was on track, ahead of schedule, and for the first time they felt like a cohesive unit, working together toward a common goal. Melissa smiled to herself. It hasn't been easy to get here. The road had been long, filled with doubt, frustration, and setbacks. But she had come through it. She had fought for herself, fought for her team, and in doing so, she had transformed. When she had first joined the company, she had been quiet, almost invisible, a worker who did the job without question, without expectation. She had spent years in the background, watching others take the spotlight, never once feeling like she deserved to be in it herself. But that had changed. Her confrontation with Karen, her defiance, her quiet rebellion. It had all been part of something bigger. It had been the catalyst for her growth, for her journey of self-discovery. Melissa leaned back in her chair, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. It wasn't just about the promotion or the recognition. It was about what she had learned along the way. She had learned that strength wasn't always loud. It wasn't always about making a scene or fighting for attention. True strength, she realized, came from within, from knowing who you are, what you're capable of, and having the courage to stand firm in the face of adversity. Her father's words echoed in her mind. You're the one who decides what kind of person you'll be. Melissa had spent years letting others define her, letting Karen and the people around her dictate who she was. But now, for the first time, she realized that she was the one who had the power to define herself. She was the one who had the power to decide how she would show up in the world. The soft sound of footsteps broke her reverie. She turned to see Tim standing in the doorway, looking a little hesitant but also eager. His expression had changed over the past few weeks, just like hers had. There was a new confidence in his eyes now, something Melissa had helped foster through her quiet leadership. "Hey, Melissa," he said, walking into the room. "Got a minute?" "Of course, Tim," she said, smiling at him. "What's on your mind?" Tim sat down across from her, his hands clasped together on the desk. "I just wanted to say, thanks," he said, his voice a little sheepish but filled with sincerity. "You've really helped me step up. I feel like I can actually contribute now, like my ideas matter. I don't think I would have had the courage to speak up if you hadn't shown me how." Melissa felt a warmth spread through her chest. She had seen this shift in him over the past few weeks, the way he had started taking more initiative, the way he had begun to believe in his own voice. She hadn't set out to be a mentor, but in a way, she had become one. Her growth had inspired those around her, just as she had hoped. "You don't need to thank me, Tim," she said softly. "You had the potential all along. You just needed to see it in yourself." Tim looked at her, a small smile playing at the corners of his lips. "I guess I did, but having someone believe in me really helped." Melissa nodded. "I believe in all of you," she said, her voice filled with quiet conviction. "And I'm proud of everything we've accomplished together. But we're just getting started." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, they both sat in silence, taking in the significance of what had been said. Melissa had spent so long doubting herself, afraid to speak up, afraid to show her true potential. But now, she was stepping into her power, not just for herself, but for her team, for everyone around her. Tim stood up to leave, but before he walked out, he turned back to her with a look of gratitude in his eyes. "Thanks, Melissa, for everything." "Anytime, Tim," she replied, her heart swelling with pride. "We're in this together." As Tim left the office, Melissa sat back in her chair again, her thoughts racing. She had fought so hard to get here, and now, she was starting to see the fruits of her labor. But it wasn't about the promotion, or the respect she had earned, or even the acknowledgement from her colleagues. It was about the person she had become. The journey she had taken had been difficult, yes, but it was worth it. Every setback, every challenge, every moment of doubt had led her here. Stronger, more confident, and ready for whatever came next. She wasn't the same woman who had walked into this company years ago. She wasn't the same woman who had been overlooked, dismissed, and pushed aside. She had found her voice. She had found her power, and she wasn't about to lose it. The phone rang, breaking her thoughts. She glanced at the screen and saw that it was a call from the HR department. She answered quickly, her heart still racing from the conversation with Tim. "Hello, Melissa." The voice on the other end said, "This is Sarah from HR. I just wanted to let you know that we've reviewed your performance, and we're very impressed with your leadership and the work you've done with your team. We're pleased to offer you a position as Senior Project Manager. Congratulations." Melissa's heart leapt in her chest. She had known this was coming, but hearing the words spoken out loud felt surreal. This was it. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment that validated everything she had fought for, the moment that proved she was worthy of the success she had earned. "Thank you, Sarah," Melissa said, her voice filled with quiet gratitude. "I'm honored. I won't let you down." She hung up the phone and sat in silence for a moment, letting the weight of the moment sink in. This wasn't just a promotion. It wasn't just a title. This was the culmination of everything she had worked for, the proof that she had the power to change her life, to define her own path. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from Emily. "So proud of you, Mom. You've come so far. You've taught me that I don't need anyone's permission to be myself. Love you." Melissa smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. Her daughter had always been her biggest supporter, and now, more than ever, she felt like she had finally become the role model she had always wanted to be for her. As she sat there in the quiet of the office, Melissa knew that this was just the beginning. She had rebuilt herself from the ground up, and now, she was ready for whatever came next. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was no longer afraid of the challenges. She knew she had the strength, the resilience, and the power to face anything. She had earned this. She had earned every step of the way, and now nothing could stop her. Have you ever had a moment when you realized you had become the person you always wanted to be? Share your story below. Let's celebrate the journeys that take us to new beginnings.